Hello, Sebastian, will you start?
Maybe, yeah, maybe we can wait just
Okay,
1 or
good.
2
I see.
minutes because the number of participants is
Okay, I
increasing.
cannot see. That's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, we have, yes, we have 50 participants, so I think we can start now. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this new EURICS scientific event. I'm Sébastien Collin, Associate Professor in Geography and Geopolitics at INALCO. And since last September, I'm also Scientific Coordinator of EURICS. Today, we have a roundtable that will explore and compare China's and Taiwan's response to the pandemic of COVID-19. This roundtable has been organized by our former EURICS fellow, Dr. Jens Dam, and Angelika Messner, professor at Kiel University. Professor Angelika Messner has kindly accepted to be discussant and chair of this roundtable, and will introduce our speakers in a brief moment. Before that, I would like to briefly introduce EURICS, the European Institute for Chinese Studies. EURICS is an institute working to promote European research and analysis capacities on China. The institute has been officially established in Paris less than 2 years ago, and currently has 2 main tasks. The first one is to host scholars for a period ranging to 3 to 10 months, with the concern to offer them the best condition and environment for their research. The second one is to organize scientific events on China, bringing together European and extra-European researchers. After a first year disrupted by the pandemic, EURICS is now taking off. Several scientific events have been organized since last November, including one public lecture of Jens Dam, and several other events will be held in the coming weeks and months as our website and newsletter show. I will stop these few words here, and now I give the floor to Professor Angelika Messner for the launch of the roundtable. Professor Angelika Messner heads the China Center at Kiel University. She studied medicine, sinology, history of medicine, and anthropology in Innsbruck, Vienna, Beijing, and Freiburg. She's a famous specialist of Chinese traditional medicine. She has written and published on a wide range of topics, including Chinese science and medicine and the cultural exchange between China and Europe since the 17th century. Professor Messner, thank you very much for the co-organization of this roundtable. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian Collin. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends from all over the world, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Jens and Sebastian Collin. So why is the theme of this EURICS roundtable such a hot and urgent topic? It is generally agreed that viruses are a medical problem. They are not political. However, there is one prominent exception, SARS-CoV-19. This virus is highly political. Certainly, virology plays an important role in the evaluation of the virus, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. I will never forget the words of our chief virologist here in Germany nearly 1 year ago, when he officially declared face masks, closure of schools, this will never happen here in Europe, and in particular not in Germany, you know. This is an Asian phenomenon, completely contrary to our culture. And as we all know, a few weeks after this proclamation, schools were closed and people somehow shyly began to wear these face masks. And what strikes most, of course, we are still there and things seem to get worse. So here in Europe, and it's high time to look to Asia, to Taiwan, to the PRC. And as we all know, the situation there is somehow different in several regards. So this is what this roundtable is about. And let me say that I'm really looking forward to the next couple of hours together with you to these honorable speakers, 5 prominent speakers we have here today, and 3 presentations. So we shall proceed this way. I shall introduce the first speaker, Dr. Jens Damm. He is currently affiliated to EURICS and with Tübingen University. From 2015 to 2017, he served as a PI of China's cultural diplomacy and the role of non-state actors at the Oriental Institute Prague. And he was furthermore an associate professor at the Graduate Institute of Taiwan Studies, Changchun University, Tainan, from 2009 to 2019. And he furthermore currently he acts as a board member of the European Association of Taiwanese Studies. So Jens, your lecture today is entitled China's Narrative of COVID-19 as Part of China's Public Diplomacy. The floor is yours.
So yes, welcome. And of course, thanks again to EURICS, where I spent really a great time, although it was partly in lockdown, so I couldn't use my really beautiful office, which was a pity. But besides this, thanks a lot to EURICS. And of course, thanks again to Professor Angelika Messner that she will moderate this roundtable. Let me start, and again, Angelika, if I will not stay in time, please remind me. So today I'm talking a little bit about China's public diplomacy, and I will introduce my overarching research question. Then I will dwell a few minutes only what is Chinese public diplomacy. Then I will introduce the periodization of public diplomacy and communication during the SARS-CoV-2 crisis in China. And then the important part here is China's health and vaccine diplomacy, establishing a narrative. And then at the very end, as a kind of summary, I will talk about soft power and SARS-CoV-2, and will highlight what are the problems, the benefits for China, and what are the danger and risks for China, and the underlying reasons. So my overarching research questions are the challenges and implications of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic on China's public diplomacy. And of course, we have new domestic developments in China, but also we have a lot of new global constellations. Some people talk about new Cold War between China and the West, which partly have to do, or at least have been emphasized by the SARS-CoV-2 crisis. When we talk about Chinese public diplomacy, I will give here a really brief kind of definition. For me, it's understood as the diplomacy of the Chinese state, but also of other actors related to the Chinese state and the CCP in relation to the presentation of one's own policy, as well as the social, cultural, and historical foundations directed at a foreign state and foreign non-state actors. This is important. Very briefly, in China itself, the term public diplomacy, both as 公共外交 or as external propaganda, 对外宣传, has been used in academic and political circles since 2003, and it is related to political terms, campaigns from Hu Jintao to Xi Jinping that would be harmony and harmonious world, 和谐世界, and of course the China Dream by Xi Jinping. There are various kinds of party and state actors involved, and I'm not going to talk about this in detail, but both in party, in the CCP and the state, there are really important groups. The most important are the external propaganda leading group and the State Council Information Office. And maybe for people who do not speak Chinese, I should mention that the term propaganda in Chinese, coming from Russian Leninist tradition, is not seen as negative as it's usually in the West. So basically propaganda in the Chinese context has much to do more with information or public diplomacy to propagate its own ideology. Let me briefly talk about the various phases of public diplomacy and communication in China. And here I refer quite often to Heike Holbig, who wrote about the first phase of China's public diplomacy in 2020. In the beginning, we had an internal struggle in China. There was a communication blockage between the local and central authorities. And when I talk here about the case of Taiwan, Taiwan was really early to raise the warning flag in Taiwan because they monitored social media and public, what was going on in China. Only slowly there was a recognition of epidemic violence in China itself. And because of the still existing Leninist structures in China, it took some time until the central government decided that it's time to inform the world. And here we are again in a kind of informing the world. Some people say a little bit late, but we can understand it when we look at the structures in China. The next phase, there was a crisis mode in China. There was a speech by President Xi Jinping on 20th of January. There started the travel bans for Wuhan, and they started for some respect in the international media. The international media, on one hand, was really surprised how fast China acted, that it closed whole cities. But as Professor Angelika Messner just said, at the same time, the Western media, Western politicians, but also Western virologists said that it's nothing to do with Europe, with the United States, with the rest of the world, and we don't have to worry about it. So at that time, we found both in China a kind of negative censorship. So while at the beginning, like the Wuhan diary from Fang Fang could still be seen, it increasingly started towards a kind of positive propaganda, how China is dealing with the pandemic. From mid-March 2020 until the end of April, we had a cooperation offer. There was a reaction to US criticism that China reacted too slow, that the outbreak had happened in December in Wuhan. So the West accused China of delaying of corresponding information. At the same time, there was Western criticism of the WHO, of the World Health Organization. So at that time, China then offered the West a kind of cooperation, but as we know, the pressure to allow an international research commissions to Wuhan finally only was granted this year. What is quite interesting then, we had a really aggressive kind of diplomacy towards the West from mid-end April to mid-May 2020. People talked about the wolf warrior diplomacy, and we had some kind of YouTube videos by Xinhua Shi, like Once Upon a Virus. But actually, when we look at this now, it's quite interesting. Basically, China just reported all the Western virologists, politicians, especially, of course, the American administration under Trump. They said, you didn't warn us. And China said, yes, but we warned you quite early. And you said the virus is not dangerous at all. And China said, yes, we told you it's dangerous. So this started at this period. The next period was the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He called to a more nuanced rhetoric, also to the Western G20. There was a white paper entitled Fight Against COVID-19, China in Action, in English and Chinese, published. Quite interesting for the researchers also, there are differences in tone within the English and Chinese version. So the English version is not just a copy of the Chinese version. There are some terms like war against the epidemic, which are basically missing. There's a much stronger kind of patriotism raised in the Chinese version. So there was also quite a discrepancy between the domestic Chinese press reports, which very much focused on this internal struggle, the fight, the war of the Chinese people and the CCP together against the virus, and a much more nuanced rhetoric we find in the English Chinese press, like in the People's Daily or the Global Times. Basically, since June 2020 up to now, we found a new kind of narrative or a kind of streamlined narrative in China. First of all, it's a kind of positive narrative. How do China describes itself, how it handled the pandemic, and how it could help the world. Secondly, international criticism of China is directly counteracted in various newspaper articles and in the English-speaking Chinese television, but also in on the social media. And interesting enough, here right, China is of course using social media like Twitter, Facebook, etc., which are not so easy accessible if you don't have a VPN in China itself. So this works in both directions. So just let me try here to, before I go into some details of health diplomacy, what is China trying to convert to the world? So China's domestic narrative seems to be built on rationality in the pandemic response, and thus indirectly better than Western discourse with a much stronger ideological background. That is what China tries to convert to the world. And the next thing which has become really strong during the vaccine diplomacy of China, China describes itself as a multilateral partner. So going back to some previous parts of the public diplomacy, how China tries to imagine its own role in the world. Very often we find topics such as cooperation in fields of science, of technology, of economics. And China also is warning the West that economics, politics, science, and technology are different fields which should be separated, and is excusing especially the US American media and the US American administration. It was a Trump administration, but it has not really changed so much with the Biden administration of mixing all these different fields together in their new kind of negative image of China, which is created. Interesting when we look at academic reports on how China should react. So two authors, Sun Ming and Kong Xianlong, at the end of 2020, in the journal Chinese Foreign Policy, summarized very much the narrative, how it has been developed in China since then. This article was called China's Anti-Epidemic Action and Public Diplomacy from the Perspective of International Public Opinion. So first of all, there is the domestic aspect that basically China tries to communicate to the world that Xi Jinping, the CCP, the Chinese government, and the Chinese people work together, and they won the People's War, as it's called, the overall war, the resistance war for epidemic prevention and control. So basically China as a model how to deal with a pandemic. And the second is the international public opinion, that it's very important that the Chinese state media, films, movies, there are YouTube movies, Xinhua Shi presented some of these things. There are longer movies from Chinese CGTN to present to the world how successful China was. And in the same article, we then even find a kind of policy advice called What Should We Do? So again, the first point is China's state media should praise China's determination and the measures taken to overcome the pandemic in China. The second point, also in contrast to the West, which is seen as chaotic with different voices, with measures which are taken again. China again is described as the unity and the strength and resilience in orderliness to overcome the pandemic. The third point is, and I will show this a little bit later in more detail, is the cooperation in fighting the epidemic. And here, of course, we have this idea of a kind of vaccine nationalism, which we can see lately between the European Union and the UK. Even the new US administration under Biden, that they are not going to export any vaccines to Europe or to Mexico. And the fourth point from China is that to fight against the distortion of China's image in Western public opinion. So now very briefly, we have COVAX, that is the COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access Program by the World Health Organization. That is basically the multilateral approach to vaccination of the whole of the world. Interesting enough that China joined relatively lately from October 2020. The USA only in January.
2 minutes, yeah.
Okay, fine, no problem. And if we look at the vaccine diplomacy as part of China's narrative, that is more the unilateral between China and other countries. And I have just some examples here from the Global Times, but of course there are other newspapers. First of all, most of all, it's a kind of positive kind of description that the world, especially Europe, welcomes China's cooperation. And we have here various examples from Serbia and Hungary, and only very seldom we find examples like Europe vaccine disorder. So basically China is not talking what is going wrong with the vaccination in the Western world, but tries to emphasize that we can overcome our problems when we cooperate with China. And now my summary, just 2 slides. Will China profit and benefit from its pandemic response? Here where I have a plus, I mean, that are the positive points. What we can see on the right, first of all, that was the hospital, which was built really fast, so they overcome the pandemic. Then we have flags from Serbia and the PRC. So that is like countries which are overlooked by the European Union, like Serbia, also Hungary complained about it, are now working together with China. And the last picture on the bottom, that was this huge pool party in Wuhan to show to the world that the pandemic does not exist in China any longer. And my last slide, there has also been some aspects which may lead that China does not benefit from its pandemic response. First of all, there is a kind of criticism which we find in several countries that China is using its vaccine donations to strengthen the Belt and Road Initiative, especially the Philippines is very critical. Some members of their parliament that it will undercut the claim of the Philippines for some islands in the South China Sea. Then there is also the criticism from Taiwan that Taiwan is still not allowed in the World Health Organization. And maybe what can be seen, and we will hear a little bit more about Taiwan, China is not talking about other East Asian countries like Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand, which also overcome the pandemic with a democratic government instead with an authoritarian government. And finally, what will happen? The pandemic is by far not yet over. When there are more global vaccines available, everybody basically predict that there will be so many more vaccines. What will this mean for China and maybe also for Russia? When then the other issues, the more negative issues with regard to China's policy, which has been in the Western media, like Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan, will then counteract the positive elements. And I'm going to end here, and I hope that I'm still a little bit in my time.
Thank you very much, Jens, for this highly informative talk. Now we would like to open the floor for a few Q&A for 5 minutes. So if there's some urgent question from the part of the audience, please just go ahead. Sebastian, this is possible, yeah? They just can raise their, and otherwise you can also use the bottom chat and write down your questions or your considerations. We can collect, and then in the end, during the round table, during the discussion, we can also take up your questions. So it's open. Maybe, Sebastian, can you see from the part of the audience if there is at this moment no urgent question? I would suggest to just here. Can you see it? Paul Kirchhoff. How was the Chinese reaction to the saying the virus comes from a laboratory in Wuhan? Jens.
They, of
Could you answer?
I think that's a very easy question. They totally denied that there is any kind of possibility that it came from the laboratory. And yes, they just, there was not one, of course, there was also in Chinese social media, especially in the beginning, that some people said it. But I think it's really interesting to know that China is quite good in streamlining its narrative after a certain period of time. And we have seen this in various forms of crisis in China. So it's basically, it's denied that it comes from the laboratory in Wuhan. And of course, there was a visit from the WHO lately. And because also these experts basically stated that it's unlikely that was seen from the Chinese side, but yes.
if there is no urgent question, I would like to proceed. So I hope you will agree. Thank you so much, Jens. So then we come back to you. So ladies and gentlemen, we proceed with our next lecture. The next speakers are Professor Sabrina Habiso-Birgalla and Professor Ginia Kostka, both professors at Free University Berlin. Let me say a few words first about Sabrina. She studied Chinese studies, political science and business in Würzburg, Beijing, and Vienna. As a PhD student, she was at the National Chengchi University in Taipei from 2009 to 2013, and her PhD thesis on dams, migration, and authoritarianism in China, the local state in Yunnan, was published in 2016 by Routledge. Her current research project is about water as a public property and its meaning in the various social groups. And then Ginia Kostka is professor of Chinese politics at Free University Berlin. Previously, she was professor of governance of energy and infrastructure at the Hertie School. Her current research project explores how digital technologies and are integrated into local decision-making and governance structures in China. So this is the ERC grant from 2020, going from 2020 to 2025. And she has a PhD in development studies from the University of Oxford. And so I could really go on, Ginia, with all your things, but now let me just say the title of your lecture today is In Times of Crisis, Public Perceptions Towards COVID-19, Contact Tracing Apps in China, Germany, and in the US. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you also to Jens for inviting us to speak here about our study of COVID-19 contact tracing apps. Altogether, there are 49 COVID-19 contact tracing apps worldwide that have been implemented to supplement human contact tracing. And we will speak here only about 3 of them, and which represent basically 2 types of COVID-19 contact tracing apps introduced globally. The first one was introduced by China already in February 2020. It was developed by Alibaba and Tencent together with local health authorities. And it's called the Health Code, which generates a QR code for users. Green meaning there's a free access to public spaces, yellow indicating that there's a risk of the user of having been infected, which is why the user has to report to local authorities, and a red code indicating a 14-day quarantine. The data that is collected is quite comprehensive. It includes travel and shopping history, symptoms, and other health information. It is stored centrally on local authorities' service, also shared with the police. The user data is traceable to the individual, as it also collects personal identity, phone numbers, and so forth. It is technically mandatory because without the health code, people cannot access public spaces or leave their residential compounds in about 200 cities in China. Compared to this, in Germany and in the US, the health codes were launched later. In Germany in June. In the US, there is no centrally coordinated approach, but locally health codes or warn apps have been implemented that are different from state to state. And most of these in the US, there are some exceptions, but in Germany and most apps in the US use Bluetooth technology to track the distance between users. The data that is stored is encrypted and not personalized, so not traceable to the individual. Data storage is 2 weeks to 1 month. And the installation and use of the app is voluntary. except adoption rates in China are very high because of the mandatoriness. In Germany and the US, they are much lower, about 10 to 30% of the population. In this study, we wanted to determine the factors that lead a person to accept COVID-19 contact tracing apps in these different national contexts. And here, this is our conceptual framework where we are looking at the different factors that, or we try to measure the different factors contributing to the acceptance of these apps, including socio-demographic factors, personal, economic, and health risks during the pandemic, perceptions of the pandemic, whether you think that there is another wave of infections coming, or whether a person thinks that the pandemic is a conspiracy. Also, experiences with and perceptions of these apps and how they impact acceptance, and socio-political belief in context, including trust in the state, for example. We assume that CTA acceptance is higher if people have been negatively affected financially and health-wise during the pandemic, if they've been more exposed to CTAs or other health tracking apps, whether they've been using these before. There are quite a few other health tracking apps on the market already for a few years, whether people believe that CTAs are actually effective and would bring positive results during the pandemic. And if people have higher trust in the state, then we also assumed that this would lead to higher acceptance rates. For this, we conducted an online survey with a Berlin-based survey institute in June 2020 already. And we collected a sample of at least 2,000 in China, Germany, and the United States. And weights were assigned for age, gender, and settlement location. And also for all three countries. And in China, there were additional weights for education and region, Eastern, Central, and Western China as well. These are representative samples for the internet connected population, as it is an online survey. And here are the results. So CTA acceptance is highest in China and quite similarly high and low in Germany and the US. The opposition to COVID-19 contact tracing apps is also highest in Germany. And then let's look at the factors. So looking at socio-demographics, we find that they are quite unhelpful to explain acceptance. So what you see here, we've done ordered logistic regression analysis to determine the influence that the different factors have on acceptance. And in the graphs, you see odds ratios, of which those above 1 are the blue ones. They increase the chance of CTA acceptance, and those below 1 in red reduce the chance of acceptance. And as you can see here, we have socio-demographics in Germany, age and the gender female lead to a higher acceptance of COVID-19 contact tracing apps. And then the other two that are at least partly significant is the size of the city, which in the United States, if you are living in a smaller city, you are less inclined to accept COVID-19 contact tracing apps. In terms of the personal, economic, and health risks, the perception of the pandemic and the effectiveness of COVID-19 contact tracing apps, we find that in the US, concerns about one's health here have a positive effect also in China. Then in China, we also see that the caring about or being concerned about one's family also has a slightly positive effect. In Germany and the US, it doesn't. So basically what you can see here, these contradictory results. For the case of China, there is no clear indication that health concerns or financial concerns play a role. This might be related to the timing of our survey, which was in June 2020, basically, when there were not many new infections in China. And interestingly, what we see here as well is that the financial situation in China, in Germany, if your financial situation worsened during the pandemic, you're less inclined to accept COVID-19 contact tracing apps. Moving on to the perception of the pandemic, whether you think that there is another, and now we should speak of another wave, back then it was a second wave of infections, then you were there was a significant positive relationship to accepting COVID-19 contact tracing apps. And then the biggest similarity across the three countries we can see here from the effectiveness and understanding and perception of these apps. They are quite similar across the three countries, where understanding perceived effectiveness of the apps, positive perceptions, for example, leading to fewer infections or better health info, all have a positive effect on the acceptance of COVID-19 contact tracing apps, whereas negative perceptions such as privacy violations or government surveillance have a negative effect on the acceptance. This is similar across all countries. Only for China, government surveillance is not significant, which might be related to preference falsification in response to these very sensitive questions. And then finally, sociopolitical belief and context. We can see here that those who think that experts and private enterprises are the ones most capable of handling the COVID-19 pandemic, are also more accepting of COVID-19 contact tracing apps, just like the central government, especially in China and in the US. If people believe that it's the central government, for example, rather than the local government, then they are also more willing to accept these apps. Whereas in China, the results are insignificant, but in Germany and the US, trust is one of the most important factors that leads trust in the state, that leads people to accept these apps. To come to our discussion, so where there are three main points. So CTA acceptance differs in the three countries, as you have seen in the beginning. It is very high in China, much lower in Germany and the United States, but there are quite similar factors that drive people's acceptance of these apps. Especially perceived effectiveness, personal experience with the apps, perceived positive and negative consequences are important factors that explain CTA acceptance in all three countries. And as I just said, trust in the state is also a strong explanatory factor, especially in Germany and the United States. And another core finding is that data privacy concerns play a role also in all three countries, as also in China, although Chinese citizens have been perceived as the ones who are not so caring about their data privacy, but they actually are. And the interesting thing is that although the European and also the US governments have tried to come to terms with the privacy concerns of their citizens, these concerns still persist. To conclude, so the positive association between CTA effectiveness and acceptance rates is basically a chicken and egg problem for CTAs, because high adoption rates are necessary for CTAs to be effective, but CTAs are only effective if adoption rates are high. So our study shows that authoritarian countries such as China can make these apps mandatory and not fear public disapproval, because the majority of people show acceptance, but such acceptance does not imply that the Chinese public is unconcerned. In fact, our study also shows that Chinese people do fear negative consequences, such as privacy violations, but Chinese citizens seem to accept mandatory instruments more easily. First of all, due to the lack of alternative options, and second, because CTAs have become a mandatory component of gaining access to public spaces. So in China, CTAs have become one of the main instruments by which individuals can return to their normal or pre-crisis way of life, return to normal levels of mobility, so to speak. In contrast, in the US and Germany, this purported usefulness of CTAs for individuals is very indirect and only comes into play if a certain number of people install it, and then even then you don't know the effect that it has for the pandemic. While previous studies have mostly done surveys in liberal political context, we show here also one example of an authoritarian government, and especially the acceptance by citizens in China. And through this, we can show that despite, especially comparing these three, despite these stark differences between the apps, there are striking similarities in the factors that drive CTA acceptance, especially with regards to the perception. So that implies, we would argue, that differences in these national technospheres, so to speak, do not necessarily lead to divergences in individual preferences, even if rates of acceptance are different. We also show that in terms of the literature on digital surveillance in China, which has shown that users in generally in China support surveillance, such as the Chinese social credit system, as long as they see its social benefit. Although China's social credit system is arguably very different from the health code, they share one commonality. Their adoption provides users with access to something, to loans and other benefits in the case of the social credit system, and to public spaces or mobility more general in the case of the health code. And these use cases make it harder for users to opt out, representing another tool that could normalize digital surveillance technologies in people's everyday lives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, for this highly informative talk. So let me open up. Let me open the floor. So we have questions directly. So there are two questions to Jens, but can you say something? Yeah, maybe the last one. Can you see it, Reinhard from Hanxletzen? Can you say something about how effective CTAs are in China in fighting the pandemic and how that compares to Germany? So the effectiveness, Sabrina is asked here.
Of course, it's very hard to measure it in numbers, but I would say that it is compared to Germany and China, it's highly effective, or much more effective, because first of all, most of the people have downloaded the health code and are using it and are using it to access public spaces. And whereas in Germany and in the US, adoption rates are very low, and it has been shown that you need at least 40% or so adoption rate in order for it to be effective at all. And we are below this in Europe and in the US. So although it's very hard to measure it maybe, but I would say that it's much more effective in China.
There is another question. How was the Chinese reaction to the saying the virus came from the laboratory in Wuhan? Yeah, can we? Yeah.
There's one more question on censorship. And I'm very sorry for my voice. I have a cold. It's not COVID. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just to make everyone safe here in our Zoom space. There was a question on censorship. And of course, that's an important topic when you do an online survey. And we are very aware that that we are not, let's say, that there's a strong bias in our sample. But we do feel that respondents in China we're also quite open. I mean, many people said they worry about privacy violations. So we feel that is something that we feel is, we can take the answer seriously. And I also did research on facial recognition technologies and social credit system in China before, where we did interviews. And generally what we find is that a lot of citizens in China don't connect digital technologies with state surveillance. And the reason is, of course, that the state media doesn't offer discussions on this. So the information available on, let's say, contact tracing apps that it could be used for other purposes is not as much available in China than, let's say, in Germany or the US. I mean, in Germany, we discussed forever privacy violations. And actually what our survey shows that it is important that people adopt the contact tracing apps. And what the survey shows is maybe it's not just about discussing the negative possibilities, but also highlight the benefits. Yeah, and policymakers should really put an emphasis on the effectiveness if everyone would use it. If you actually, what Germany is now expanding the functions of the CTAs by introducing also QR codes where you either you need to have this code to get access to public spaces or not. It's called Luke. It's similar to Luca for the Germans. And so I think what this one key takeaway from our survey is that not just focus only on the possible negative side, but communicating also the positive functions of these technologies to fight the pandemic. Because actually right now in Germany, it doesn't work. Like my kids were, half of the kindergarten had COVID, and my contact tracing app said no signs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that makes you really wonder whether this technology is useful or not. Anyway, so that was, but the censorship question is a very important one. And yes, more research is needed anyway, not just survey-based one, but at the moment, as we all know, we all suffer from access and everything. But good question, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and maybe I could just raise, this question in relation to trust, because it seems to me that this question of trust somehow is positioned in a different way in the Chinese case, because it's not the question I reflect now here, should I trust or not? No, it works, and then I can trust. Somehow it's in a different way. So maybe we can discuss afterwards. And is there another question here? Let me see.
Yes.
No,
Isabel has a question to me.
Do you see? Yeah, who?
Okay, maybe I can read it by myself. A question to myself by Isabel Cheng, also from the board, General Secretary of EATS. Jens, you mentioned one particular piece of advice given to the PRC government on paying attention to Chinese overseas. How has the PRC government responded to the challenge that Chinese people abroad have been the target of racist attacks? Basically, we look at the international Chinese media. First of all, what I mentioned is like China tries to counteract what they see as a kind of wrong and biased description of China's response to COVID. So there are some pieces in the People's Daily where they really go very much in detail against Pompeo and Trump and try to counter their arguments, what China has done wrong. Also in the small video which I showed, which we can see on YouTube, where the comparison of China and the West. So basically China has done nothing wrong. And so of course, if then there are attacks on Chinese or people of Asian descent in the United States or in other Western countries, including the UK, then of course they will say that's the mistake, the fault of Trump, of the American administration, and of the Western media who presented a wrong image of China. The second thing is, especially in the Chinese language media, there is a strong description of the solidarity of the Chinese people, of the Chinese government, with people who have been attacked abroad. And interesting enough, here they also try not only to talk about Chinese people, but they say these are all people of Asian descent. There are long reports, for example, of BTS, this Korean pop group, which was engaged in this kind of a fight against these anti-Asian biases in the West. And this is also reported in both in the Chinese, local Chinese media and in the Chinese official media. So this kind of solidarity is also very important, which is shown in the state narrative.
Thank you, Jens. Now, I would suggest to proceed with the next speaker. So now Dr. Chung-Yi Lee and Dr. Yuqing Guo. Chung-Yi Lee is Associate Professor at School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Nottingham. She's also the Director of Taiwan Studies Program at Nottingham and a board member of the European Association of Taiwan Studies. Her current research project is on comparing Taiwanese and UK's government strategies to counter COVID-19. Dr. Yuqing Guo is an independent researcher working in the private sector. Previously, she was a postdoctoral research fellow based at the National Taiwan University. Her recent publication is Brexit, Supply Chains and the Contest for Supremacy, the Case of Taiwan and Semiconductor Industry. So it will, I think it's already published in 2021. The title of your presentation here is Digital Democracy in Coping with the Pandemic Lessons from Taiwan. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Angelika Messner. I will now share my screen and also just to briefly introduce our projects and how we will proceed. Our project started from a very simple motivation from my side to think the country where I live in had such devastated consequence of the COVID, where the country I'm coming from, Taiwan, actually, so far, it's only 1,006 infected cases and 10 death rates. Sorry, 1,009 infected cases and 10 deaths toll. So in the UK, it is unimaginable. And this is where I came from since last year, June. I started to work with a group of colleagues, including my very dear colleague, Dr. Yuqing Guo. And we would like to present to you what we are looking at in the case of Taiwan, why Taiwan as a democratic country will be able to cope with pandemic. And the project is just really second to the beginning of Professor Messner, what you just said about the pandemic is not an issue only for the medical science. It's an interdisciplinary query from the politics science, from the medical management, and from all the society concerned. So our presentation will start by Dr. Guo, and I will be the second half of the speaker. So please, Yuqing.
Thank you, Chung-Yi, and thank you, EURICS, to invite me to make a presentation here. First slide, we want to introduce some of the strategy which Taiwanese government has taken to fight against the outbreak. As you can see on the screen, the first one is the tracking. We have the tracking digital footprint of those who are supposed to be in the home quarantine. And the second one, Taiwanese government has in the very early stage of the pandemic, has already taken some strategy or some approach to have some border control. For example, they will ask foreigner or even Taiwanese who want to return to Taiwan to fill in a form 48 hours before their departure online. So basically they will register who will coming back or coming to, so who will go into Taiwan. And secondly, we the government use a national insurance system to monitor some specific individuals' travel history or their occupation history, or where they have been, who they have been contact. So through all these systems, the authority would know who they have been in contact with and where they have been traveled to. And also, we have a epidemic command center, which will report and give a brief press conference to report what's going on with the outbreak. So it's basically to tell people what the government has been doing and what the government has done in order to prevent the public panic. And also the government also recruit and also deploy some domestic medical equipment manufacturer, ask them to provide, to work harder to provide, for example, some personal protection equipment for medical doctor, the first line doctor, and also the nurse. And also they ask them to produce what the crucial one is for the public, which is the facial mask. So this is the fight strategy the Taiwanese government has been taken since the early stage of the pandemic. Next one, please. And also, the Taiwanese government has been dealing with the pandemic with different approaches. And here we want to emphasize the element of governance and leadership. We want to take there are many dimensions we can look at these issues, but we want to highlight two dimensions here. The first one is public health, and the second one is science and technology. The first one we want to emphasize is that it just coincidentally we have some senior member of high officials in the government. They are, for example, we have two vice presidents. They are either medical doctor before they enter the central government, or they have earned their PhD or higher degree in public health. And also we also have in terms of the ministry management, the minister or director in Minister of Health and Social Affairs, they must have normally I wouldn't say use the word must. Normally they hold medical degree. They are medical doctor before enter the ministry. So basically, these people, they have knowledge in terms of public health, and also when they take advice from their peer in terms of how to manage the pandemic, they speak the same language. So when they make medical decision, it's based on the knowledge of what they have got in the past. And also in terms of science technology, many of you may have known we have a digital minister called Audrey Tang. She is a expert in high IT, and she has been given a lot of interview to the Western media and how to tell them how Taiwanese has been cope with the pandemic. And also she is a very open-minded person. Before she entered the central government, not much cooperation between the private sector and the government in order to create the public space for this kind of discussion, especially in terms of open government data. But when she entered the government, she initiated a lot of projects to call for collaboration between these two sectors, especially to combat the coronavirus outbreak. And also, in terms of organizational setting, we because the Taiwanese government has taken a lot of lessons from the outbreak of SARS in around 2003. So since then, the government has already started preparing how to prevent the same emergency happen again. So since then, they established center called National Health Command Center, just to respond once again if this kind of public health emergency happen again. What would they do? What is center will have to do kind of preparation work before it happen? And also after that, some very similar center organization are created as a platform to respond to this kind of disaster, and also to trace perhaps if they have seen the early sign of the outbreak, what they can do, and then what they can deploy other or alert the public for this kind of outbreak. And also in terms of how to combat this COVID-19 outbreak, the central government also established electronic epidemic prevention service platform, just to make a connection between two various different kind of electronic system, which will trace, it's kind of trace system, but also kind of alert, send out alert to tell the public what the hard part of the virus could be. Next one, please. Next one, please, Choi. Jean. Yeah. And then, as I mentioned, that we have the government has already taken a lot of lessons from themselves. So one element of this is the regulatory framework. So since then, they try to refine or revisit a lot of regulation or bill or act, just to kind of prepare for the future this kind of happening again. So for example, we have a community board disaster control act. I mean, the main thing for this kind of act, I mean, it's really to give most of these ads. If you look at the detail, you will see it's to give the power for the authority to act quickly and take the necessary action to just really to efficiently to deal with the problem. And also Sabrina also mentioned about personal data protection. This is one element of this regulatory framework. Next one, please. Joey, next one, please. And Taiwanese government has been very proud of the scientific and technology epidemic prevention, and what kind of approach they have done in relation to use science and technology to fight against the pandemic. So, for example, what they have been using is so-called big data and analytics and cloud computing. In fact, many probably around 2018, the central government has a lot of national initiative in relation to cloud computing, and one of them is called a computing application and development project, which is to ask government ministry and relevant organization to share their ministerial data through cloud computing applications. So in terms of Ministry of Health and Social Science Affairs, they have something called Pharma Cloud System, which later on renamed as National Health Insurance Medic Cloud System, which has done a lot of work when it comes to combat COVID-19 outbreak this time. And so and also as mentioned, the central government has used this cloud computing a lot. So the central government also set up a task force on big data and analytical for this pandemic prevention. So it was launched by the central administration department. We call it Executive Yuan at a very early stage of the pandemic. So which it was actually chaired by the vice premier to kind of use the data from different and connect from different ministry and just to share, ask these different ministry to share their data and integrate a digital database for the IT expert to analyze the data and then trace the pandemic system. Next one, please. Next one, please. As mentioned earlier, the health NHI system has played a significant role in this pandemic. So here is just a brief introduction about our NHI system and how it works with the cloud computing system here. So basically, many Taiwanese are actually quite proud of this system, and because it covers all citizens, and then around 93% of the healthcare provider has a contract with the NHI. And this one, and since it was upgraded as a medical system in 2015, before that, the doctor couldn't really see our personal history of our registration with different hospital or where I have been seeing the doctor. But since this cloud has been created, the doctor here, for example, where I live, if I go to a local doctor, he will be able to see if I have been seeing other doctors in other part of Taiwan, for example. And also they upgrade the system from time to time. For example, since 2018, the local, even the local pharmacists, they can see the prescription which my doctor has been given to me, no matter which part of Taiwan I collected from. So this is roughly the system I want to introduce to all. Chongyu, it's your turn. Thank you. Jinyi, it's your turn.
Thank you, Yuqing. Sorry, just the computer is a bit slow. Please don't worry, I'm here. So thank you, Yuqing, for getting all the information necessary. And I'm entering the debate actually, and also to introduce further rather the strategies that Taiwan implemented, but really get into the question of how to buy in. Okay, so what our previous speaker, Sabrina and another colleague that you both mentioned about the buying of the China, Germany and USA's citizens buying of the CTAs. And here we wanted to say that in Taiwan, the buy-in actually is built upon this public and private partnership. Yuqing previously introduced our digital minister, a very legendary lady, Audrey Tang, and she herself is coming from, if you like, a cybersecurity hiker. So hiker, what do you mean by hiker? Actually, they are just normal engineers or technicians, but they actually will be able to get into the data, okay, and work collaboratively to develop, for instance, the app like Mask Map, electronic map, of course, allow the users to check in convenience stores and pharmacies at a period of time that Taiwanese government ration of the mask. And these group of hackers, engineers, they design the electronic map for the users, citizens. They will be able to check in where are the pharmacy they can buy the mask, so they don't need to queue that long. Okay, but this is important to point out that Audrey herself, she is in to support and to actually advocate this collaborative platform, which could be able to share information between the government and society. So that is in a way that it will be able to open more space for the citizens or society to participate and to share with the government and to buy in the society's trust. For instance, also apart from the daily briefing from the television, as well, our fellow countrymen and women can see in the UK, like back then, there's a briefing of the prime minister or medical experts on the TV of the virus progress. In Taiwan, they not only use the TV channel, but also use the social media apps. For instance, in the West, you are familiar with the WhatsApp. In Taiwan, they use Line to brief what is the progress, what is the situation with the virus connection, or how many cases are infected. And those apps are not just to tell you those very dry data. They also would put up a very smiley face from a dog, and to inform you, oh, you have to be careful of the social distance, so on and so forth. All these small details, as Audrey, she briefed us in Nottingham. Well, come to Nottingham's webinar, as here I provided the link, is to say that she and her colleagues in cabinet believe that as long as if you close up the distance between the government and the society and provide the space, the trust from the society to government will certainly to increase. But the fact is, the government probably should first to trust the society first. She herself, as a civil hiker, probably is the evidence as an example that we could show. So I promise you to provide some debates, because Yuqing provide overview about the strategies that Taiwanese government has been provided as a democracy. Even so, we mentioned a lot about these privacy, and also about the government's consent, government's openness to the society. There's still some queries or worries from a lot of Taiwanese law scholars. They would question the government that, well, there's still quite ambiguity in the law making about the privacy, even though if you would like to say like Taiwan has benefited from the previous 2003 SARS and has been, as Yuqing already presented, to acknowledge that there's the protection of the citizens' privacy in certain law acts. But there's still, of course, a lot of loopholes, if you like, in terms of the law making. And also, it's important to obtain the consent of the people, from the people actually, before using personal information. It is in a way of the demonstration of the respect of the individual rights, if you like. But here, we are still learning a lot, what Taiwanese government and society are still learning a lot, how to obtain the people's consent as adequately. So that is number one controversy and debate. And I believe this debate exists in all the democracies. Yeah. Number two, the debates or the challenges, if you like. The first challenge we would like to open for discussion is in Taiwan. The civil engineers and technicians, they have already expressed their concerns or consideration about what we just mentioned about this government and private partnership, if you like, open government, open data. Although, as we mentioned, that they are the electronic mask or electronic map mask, if you like, for the citizens, but actually the quality or the formation of the open data is still not very user-friendly. It might be very easy for a computer savvy young generation, but for the elder generation, I would say probably including myself, it probably is not that easy to use, okay? And the second point is the accessibility of the data probably is not very, the cross government agency and civil engineers, actually the communication still need to improve. So it's not, although the government emphasizes very good that the government open a space for the civil engineers, but this is a very vague phrase to say. There's still concrete obstacle, if you like, exist in open the data. And certainly that the third point is how transparent, how open the data can be. It's always a question. So from the society, the civil engineers or hikers, if you like, they wanted to establish the institutionalization of open data and digital government. This is in the process they are building up. One point we need to rest here is the pandemic hit us all in no time. So they wouldn't be able, as all other countries, wouldn't be able to really react in a really, systematic and logic way. This is the best in many of the countries that could react to. And this is what Taiwan has found that, well, even though we emphasize that we would like to promote open government, we're already doing that, but there's still quite a lot of pitfalls, and also there's still quite a lot of obstacles. Second challenging, that is.
Chun-Yi, 2 minutes, yeah?
Promise you, yes, thank you.
Okay.
What is the role of the state? This is the most interesting part to me as a person from School of Politics, how much the state can exert the power. So we already had the act in Taiwan, law regulation, that the data will be erased after 28 days. But in fact, how much that the states could react, how much the state could surveillance and also investigated into the personal data. This is still a constant issue, well, or query in Taiwan. So how much of the state power will be able to take, and now, as I mentioned, there's no time for debate, but when we have time to really reconsider, how could that be, to reach a mutual agreeable ground? The last challenging is Professor Li Jianliang from Academic Sinica raised these 2 good points. The big data has been contributed to enhance the state power. However, it also, as we all are talking about, will be translated into quite prevalent, strict monitoring. So how does this data leviathan and surveillance capitalism can actually provide the public and private partnership, PPP, hopefully. And the last point is how to rethink this algorithmic society, which is such a big mathematics society, which to be shaped by the digital technology. Especially, there are so many restrictions on privacy, equality, freedom of speech, freedom of movement that we are all facing now. Of course, in Taiwan, there's not much of limit of freedom of movement within the island. But when the island is opened, the border, which probably need to consider pretty soon, how can Taiwan to face all these problem issues? So that is to say that we do not have much of the conclusion, but actually we probably raise a lot of the questions. Very much welcome for your questions to us. I think it will be great for us to continue to think about along those lines and to fortify our paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chun-Yi and Guo. I open the floor. I open the floor from our here we have already a first question. Dr. Yu-Qing Kuo, could you please explain a little bit more about what is meant by intelligent electronic fence system?
Okay, basically, as mentioned earlier, it's part of the governance strategy to trace where people go and where who they have in contact. So it's a technology-based tracing app, just like Sabrina has been talking about. It's one of these kind of app. At the beginning of the pandemic, I can't remember how many weeks, but our network service provider, they cooperate with the central government, and so they create this kind of app. They also offer quite a few thousand mobile phones for these people they just come back from Taiwan, or they come to Taiwan, then there is people to carry all this mobile phone around, and then just because they are supposed to be in quarantine or being isolated, so they hold this mobile phone, then the authority will be able to know if where they have been, just in case there could be the confirmed case later. But after a few weeks, they further develop different, they further establish the aid. So basically, when people come into Taiwan or they come back to Taiwan, they have the feeling of the electronic phone, as mentioned earlier, is called a quarantine system for entry. So they basically enter they have to tell the system what their mobile phone number is. So they have been positioned by the cell phone provider, a network service provider. So the network service provider will notice whether they are really being quarantined. So basically, they won't add, but they would add. The only thing they will do is to inform the command center whether these people has been going out or what they have been doing, and then the system will inform the local police or the local authority to visit a person if they do go out. So this is really kind of strict system.
Yeah, again, the next question is, can you see it? Does it mean that the tracking system is limited to specific individuals and not tentatively the entire population, as we saw in the previous presentation? Can you maybe? No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Yu Qingguo.
Sorry, yeah, indeed. Sorry, I didn't make it clearly. Indeed, the system only target at the confirmed case. So they will, for example, when these people use their national insurance card, when they enter the system, the doctor will ask their travel history or their occupation history or their contact history, just want to make sure or block the possibility of outbreak. So they only target mainly to these people or those people who has highly possibility of being infected.
Thank you. And so the last question here comes also from a German perspective. So the question how the government faces, or if they're at all in Taiwan are kind of protesters, you know, they question the government's measurements. So, and the question, yeah, is how did the government handle? Did you observe such a situation?
Can I say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's probably go beyond the COVID pandemic situation. Audrey Tang herself was from the 2013 Sunflower Movement, so she was from the rebellions, if you like. Yeah. So in less than during the COVID, Yuqing, you could please correct me. During the COVID impact, I don't think there are like a big protest as in the UK or in Germany so far. But Yuqing, again, you could correct me. But what I wanted to say is the current cabinet as Taiwanese government in power, at least a part of the ministers, as mentioned, that digital minister Audrey Tang, she's from the social movement herself. So they know quite how to connect the people in a sense. And that's why the hikers come from, or civil hikers come from. But Yuqing, please correct me if there are any protests from like March till now in Taiwan.
No, I don't think there is such a demonstration going on, because I think Taiwanese people, in a way, have certain trust in our government in terms of how they deal with the pandemic. I wouldn't say 100%, but I mean, there is a high percentage of trust in government in terms of dealing with this pandemic.
I just also wanted to add that I think in December last year, or November, December last year, there was a protest about the pork import from America, and also there was protest about closing down or revoke a license of CTI TV. But one point I think audience here we need to bear in mind is the infection rate in Taiwan is very small. Yeah. So although they were protests, but the government wasn't, as in the UK, a very recent protest of a lady who was murdered, sadly, was being quite I would say mishandled, but they have both sides, pros and cons. What I wanted to say is, even though they were protests, as I just now record, in December or early December, late November in Taiwan, because of the low infection rates, so it wasn't much of that concern, but people still wear masks. I think that was the main difference of the situation in Taiwan and from where I am in the UK. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe it's more a question to the colleagues from Free University Berlin, because we talked a little bit about trust, and also that there is a question from one of the audience: to what extent are the answers of Chinese participants to the survey reliable and free from auto-censorship? So, because in Taiwan, we talked a lot about trust in the government. So how do you measure trust in China in the government? And I think because you carried out this research, I think this is rather interesting, because here we see the mistrust by these open demonstrations, but you cannot have these open mistrust toward the Chinese government, although there were at the beginning, of course, some local actions against some measures which were seen as too harsh. But in general, what do we deal with trust? I don't know if maybe Professor Koskar or Sabrina has some answers to this.
Should I go ahead? So yeah, I think Genya has already answered the question regarding the auto censorship, which is always there in China as soon as you ask politically sensitive questions. So basically you have to bear that in mind when you analyze these questions, and also frame your results in a way that account for any preference falsification. Measuring trust is a highly complex matter, and the OECD, I think, has a 49-page roadmap of how you measure trust in a survey. So our measurement of trust here is quite crude, because it's not a survey about trust, but so we have only really just included one question, and you can see that it is related also significantly related in Germany and the US. In China, you can't see any significance because probably there might be some preference falsification, although it's surprising a little bit, because you would assume that people, when they falsify their answers, then they would state that they trust the government, right? So but yeah, in general, you have to ask at least 10 questions on trust to have a comprehensive measure. But we didn't do that.
May I? So what we see, so open, Sebastian, would you like to observe our audience, how many questions come in? But I would like to direct our discussion towards the question, how? So at the moment, we can observe that this pandemic somehow challenges. So it started in China and Taiwan already in 2003 with the SARS. You know, this was a starting point for really professionalism there. So I know it from Taiwanese colleagues and also from Chinese. They worked a lot together with the government in order to not allow, you know, such a situation coming back. And so from my point of view, what I saw also from your last paper, so somehow it's the idea you have a poly or a polyglot or a multivocal situation. So you have, so of course you have also the issue of resilience. How can what Chinese also Xi Jinping and especially us in Taiwan, they say we are immune, we empower, we need to be stronger. And so how can we do this? And then also, of course, Chinese medicine came in. So this is in Europe, no matter, but in Taiwan, it's an important issue as well as in China and also in Korea also. So the kind of, how can I prepare myself with the help of, also cheap, it's not too expensive. So to prevent myself to come into this situation. So this was a very, I think, a deep discussion. And as I know, I have a friend in Taiwan, also Professor Su Yichang, who once he called me in May. He said, we have no patients. Can you help me? I need some patients. Then we can have a test, how our medicine works. So it was really a strange situation. And so I think, so I would really, so what I learned today, I think we need to address this question, how this pandemic and how this health, it's kind of a health diplomacy is becoming crucial in our geopolitical transformation. I would like to, so this is what I would like to maybe to foster further roundtables together with you also, because I think it's really a historical moment. And also what you say, we from a European, you can criticize, but I think in the European perspective, you always say no technical solutions for everything, no, but in China, also in Taiwan, it works. So if you use it in the right way, is digital revolution, is a digital democracy possible? I would like to ask you, do you believe it? I would say we should at least try to envision, to try to think about how could this be? So please go. Now I see.
Can I just
yes, please.
second?
Yes.
Just to say, because we are in this process of working on this project, I think one medical Professor Angelica, you might be aware a very important medical management difference between China, Taiwan, apart from the Western countries, because of the SARS situation. So the Chinese and Taiwanese government, they wanted to eliminate the virus as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the West, in the UK, in America, at the beginning, it was mitigating. So I'm sure you heard of our great Prime Minister of the herd immunity, this beautiful idea. And from the data that I am reading, that to tackle this disease, especially the very similar to the SARS, and the time is so important. So I'm not sure in the case of Germany, in the UK, lost completely 2 months time. And Taiwan immediately went to the border control for 2 reasons. First, Taiwan has experienced SARS. Yes. Knowing that this is not just a Chinese flu. Because at the beginning, my students told me, Chunyi, we will be fine, we're strong, this is just a flu. No, it is not. Secondly, also because Taiwan has been all the time facing China pressure. Taiwan doesn't believe Chinese anything, if you like. So that's why Ian just at the beginning, he pointed out Taiwan was the first country sort of caught the alert. This is something happened, reflected to WHO. Of course, not much of the responses back then, but because of Taiwan, it has a particular distrust on China. So that's the reason Taiwan was very sort of prepared at the very beginning, and also the SARS experience. But I might be too distant from Taiwan. I would like
to, also to ask you your idea, also to Gina and Sabrina. What's your idea? So you also have South Korea. So it's also democracy. So you have also there. So they were able to contain. And somehow also the issue of trust there somehow is is there or not, whatever. So we will, but so this is a very important question, because from the European perspective, they always say, oh, Asia, you know, it's just these socialist things, but they are different. There are different systems there. Yeah, Ginia, please.
I mean, sorry for my voice. I think they're really different systems, right? When I go to at a dinner table, I mean, I don't have dinners with my friends now, but I always just say, well, we can look to China and learn how China dealt with it. Of course, you know, China had a lot more previous experience from SARS and was able to build the institutions up. But I mean, a lot of responses China did would not work in Germany. And I think that's really what we have to keep in mind. I mean, we can't make contact tracing mandatory in Germany. So the policy options are different. And yes, we, you know, the authoritarian tools are much more effective in such a crisis. But I think that's, you know, I don't want to just put this blame shifting. It's so easy to say, oh, some Asian countries, you know, they close the borders, they're really good. I mean, we just can't, you know, close our borders in Germany and put everyone in a hotel and lock them up. It's not an option. So I think this is important in this debate, but I'm not, what I find personally interesting, and I think this is, everyone was taken by surprise. And I think it's really interesting to look how institutions work and don't work, Western or not Western. And I think in China, even there, we've seen a lot of failures. Yes, the local central government, there was a lot of blame shifting in China at the very beginning. In Germany, we have the very blame shifting as well. So I think it will take a while for us to really digest, you know, what has happened and why, and what could we have done better. I must say, what for me a takeaway is that international, like global issues, sometimes still become very national issues. Yes, so it's an international organization. We don't see like a global contact tracing app. We see national ones, and even within national ones in the US, you have a lot of sub-local contact tracing apps. So addressing certain issues, even if we pretend to be a global world and we have these strong international institutions, in crisis mode, when things get hard on hard, it comes back to the national governments. And here we have certain constraints. And in Germany, I think one discussant here mentioned it. I mean, we have a lot of, opposition. We have a lot of people who believe in conspiracy theory. In our survey, we asked, in the US, 30% believe it's a conspiracy. In Germany, I think it was about 15%. I mean, these are high numbers. So a lot of people believe it's a flu. They believe it's, you know, like some big, like other agenda behind. And so if you have this, it's very different for policymakers. But anyway, I stopped my monologue. I'm sure other people have something interesting to say. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I just was reading, there was a question, has the Taiwanese public raised any privacy concerns during the pandemic in response to the digital tracking system? And I think Gunter Schubert answered, yes, some have, but they have been stranded with their cases in the judicial system. Going back to that, what we just discussed, isn't it the case that for sure what China has done could not be done in Germany by the executive or the parliament, because there would be judges who basically would say, no, these measures are too much, you cannot do this. So we have this all the time. So even in the case of Taiwan, I could think of many of the measures of the Taiwanese government where the German judicial system would say, no, you cannot do this. So for example, the access to all medical data, I cannot imagine that this would be possible in Germany, even if we had the parliament deciding this kind of law. I think there would be, not only from the media, of course, there would be various interest groups, individuals, but also the judicial system would say that is an overreach, that cannot be done. So in a way, I think it's very, really difficult to say what has really been done by the government better than in the Western states. And what also Gina Koska has mentioned, there are some things which cannot be done in Western democracies, but they could be done, for example, in South Korea or in Taiwan as a kind of Asian democracy. Yeah, Tuni.
Sorry. just to echo what Yan, you just said about the NHI system, the NHI card system, what I wanted to say is Taiwanese government actually not because of pandemic to have this system established, as Yuqing mentioned, in 2012 already, Yuqing, if I'm correct. So every Taiwanese citizen has the NHI card, which is amazing that they've gone through all these debates about the privacy and the medical records. All of us have an NHI card. So you insert that card, you give to your GP, local pharmacy, they know your whole history that is in the card. It somehow make a good usage now, but of course you're right, that comes with the discussion and everything, but that part Taiwan already went through. So I think that was a big, well, if I could say a big win of the Taiwan's situation. Sorry.
So I would again, maybe just to point at this, my previous idea, so my observation, so that seen from a global perspective, including Taiwan, China, and all, somehow I think this issue of health diplomacy or of health is global health is a new issue. So it became important, and we will. I'm sure we will. You know, in the end, in the Nobel Prize. So far we don't have epidemiology, but we will have one in a few years. You will see, and this is something I think as observers or also historians, we should really take a minute to reflect and together, yeah, to discuss. And so I highly appreciate also our discussion here together. I would really suggest let's meet again, you know, to discuss also these agambens, of course, these critical voices. We need to have a public discussion, also in Germany, because in Germany trust at the moment is not that, you know, it's mingling. it's you know, maybe you could restart to ask how do you trust this government? Oh yes, you know, no, just the issue of trust is so important, is in terms of social cohesion, and yeah, this from my point of view. Can you see another? Yes, there are 4 questions. 4. No.
Okay, maybe I can. Can you see the questions, Angelica? Otherwise, I could just read the 4 questions and we could try to answer them together. The one question also from Isabel Chung: how has the Taiwanese government's effective suppression of the disease incorporated into Taiwan's public diplomacy, apart from propagating Taiwan can help? Then we have a question from Gunther Schubert or a comment to Yuqing and Chunyi. You may want to include in a project a brief analysis of the Taiwan's government approach to buying vaccine or vaccine procurement, which is becoming a highly controversial issue in Taiwan, undergoing much politicization. Then Fiorillo Alio, many thanks to both of you. My question goes to Dr. Gore. Could you say a little bit more about the lawmaking preparation of the institutions, health institutions, comment center, and experts? How were their decision-making empowerment along the crisis? And then we have to Professor Kostka, to reinforce your point, where Europe did try to manage the vaccine policy, it turned out a fiasco in the eyes of many, building more distrust in global institutions. And maybe last questions, South Korea, do they have options, or maybe also Taiwan and China, that we don't have? Yes, maybe up to now. Who will answer?
Can I just start with Isabel's question, and then Yuqing, you probably can also get into the vaccine, China's vaccine, which I would say you probably have more of grounded understanding, and the institutes preparing of the digital open data institute. So I think Taiwan hasn't, just from my observation here, it's getting diluted about the Taiwan. Taiwan can help these if I could use this word propaganda, this governmental propaganda has been very strong, I would say, in May, June 2020, especially coming with the mask diplomacy, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
But we already, at this point of time, this past that stage of the mass diplomacy, we are entered the vaccine, which quite nicely connected to Gunther's next question. And Taiwan can't really do much on that point. But at the point of time, I wanted to say to Isabel and also to our audiences that Taiwan can help. This propaganda was powerful, along with, especially if we remember back then, that was May 2020 WHO's conference that Taiwan always wanted to get in, but always was once granted at WHA, but never really granted to enter WHO. So Taiwan can help, had a coincidence, or if you like, strategic timing with Taiwan wanted to get into WHO. So that's from my perspective. Yuqing, please.
But may I just add one single thing? WHO. So this has a history, as you know. WHO and China, PSC has since the 1950s is close together, but Taiwan only for a few years was part. So this is somehow it's grown out from the history, and now it's not an easy. It's as you know. But as far as I know, so the Chinese government with Taiwanese experts, they cooperated. So physicians and so forth, because they both shared this experience from SARS. And this is what I really from the beginning on knew, because I remember we had in May 2020 we should gather in Taipei for a huge conference, and then I was approached in January from Taiwanese colleagues say we will not do it, and then we in Germany say, oh, no problem, in May, it's no problem. They say, no, we know it's really, it's dangerous. So they cooperated. So at the level of from the physicians, so yeah.
Just to say, actually, scholars, medical experts,
yes,
people to people cooperate.
Yes.
But level up to WHO, Taiwan can help. This is a politics. It comes back to, again, Gunther's point of vaccine. It's politics mingled much more with the medical experts. So I agree with you. People, we communicate, but not uppers there. Yeah.
Yuqing, do you want to say something about the vaccine raised by
Gunther? Thank you for the question about the vaccine, but I think it's not only happened in Taiwan in terms of the politicalization of vaccine. But if you ask me about Taiwanese case, I think it is because, as you know, the political situation of Taiwan. So it's for Taiwanese people, it's much difficult to get a vaccine. And I can, for example, probably many of you have heard of Bloomberg, the TV network, the news network. In November last year, they ranked Taiwan as number 2 of a country to resilience of a pandemic. Taiwan was ranking number 2, and it was dropped down to Taiwan was dropped down to kind of number 7 because the difficulty of getting vaccine. And yeah, I think they are. It's not confirmed, but I mean, there have been a lot of rumors saying, oh yeah, because Chinese government had been stopping Taiwan from buying all this vaccine, but it's not confirmed. So it's all about rumor. So we can't confirm it. But in terms of the vaccine, it is difficult to get. And also, of course, Taiwanese people, Taiwanese government, kind of right before the early stage of the pandemic. Our national health institution and academic Sinica and some other institutions are based in Army I think they try to develop our own vaccine, but I think they can't really they can't really have confidence of saying, yeah, it's susceptible and that you can open to the public to use it. Yeah.
But isn't it a little bit the problem, what I also described in the beginning, that of course for China is in a different position with regard to vaccines, because basically there are not many cases in China. So internally, there is no need for a rapid kind of vaccination, especially for a large country like China. Maybe it's different for Taiwan, which is much smaller and people like to travel and go abroad. So of course, China is using the vaccines to offer them to other countries in the world, also for a kind of a diplomatic effort. So for China, that is rather easy at the moment. But so it's also hard to say what would happen if China again has more cases. And I think what we have learned from the pandemic, there are still cases in China. It's not really eradicated. They could come back. And of course, also in the West, in Germany, there was a period when we thought we are really doing a good job. We won't have a second wave. So I think that it's a pandemic is still going on, and it's a kind of observation what is going on at the moment with really various different kind of situations in the respective countries. Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
I just want to make one final comment about, I mean, Germany or US are much harder hit, or the UK. And I think what I observe is that citizens have carried a lot of, burden during these months and now a second year. And I think this is where now criticism comes in, right? They turn towards politicians and they want solutions. Initially, there was hope that solutions work, and now it's, it takes longer and longer. So I think the patience of citizens is a lot thinner. And what we see in Germany now, that, there's a lot of more corruption coming up, right? Like the boyfriend or husband from a politician selling masks and making personal profit. And I think that is what really now is also interesting when we talk about trust, that there's a mistrust is growing, because also people really themselves carried a lot of hardship, and they expect politicians to now do something and not abuse the system. And so I think that will be interesting when we talk later about the failures of individuals and of institutions, and this will take a time to really for everyone to reflect on this, and I think that's why it's right now a very, let's say, tense atmosphere, but that's just from the perspective also to bring the citizens back in. They really did a lot, and they just want to feel the politicians do the best they can, and so then these failures don't really help to ensure trust, let's say, in the German politicians.
Just to say, Yuqing, would you like to answer one of the question about the law-making preparation for the institutes, as probably we mentioned in our presentation of the Open Data Institute?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Sorry. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Question is, could you say a little more about the lawmaking regarding the preparation of the institutes, the health institutes, for instance, command center and experts decision-making based on which empowerment? Is from one of the audience, Florilla, if I pronounce the name correctly.
I think, as mentioned earlier, I think the government has done what they can to prepare the future a pandemic happen again. So after that, they amend one of the rules to create so-called National Health Command Center. And after that, they feel probably this is not really enough. So soon after that, they established another one called Central Epidemic Command Center, which probably Taiwanese has been seeing them, the group of them every day on TV, because they keep reporting the confirmed case, and then till updating the news about what's going on with how they deal with the pandemic. Yeah, I think according to the role, the commander of the center will be given a lot of authority to take necessary action, to combat the pandemic. But basically, although we see them, yeah, they could be the commander, but all the decision making, all the action that have been taken, as far as I know, they have to consult with many other people, experts, and also the measure or the action, they also have to. It's kind of a cross-ministerial decision, I would say, because they need, for example, they need data to confirm, to be analyzed, and they all need different data to say, for example, they need data from the Ministry of Health, Health and Social Affairs. They also need data from the Immigration and Customs. So, I mean, this is not only about the issue of how they deal with the pandemic just by one single authority or ministry alone. It's across ministerial cooperation as a whole. Yeah.
There is one last remark here. I heard that in Beijing, everybody who wants to get the vaccine, but people are reluctant because they do not feel a need due to the very few COVID cases. I cannot answer. I don't know if this is the case, but so maybe somebody can or yeah.
I mean, a lot of my Chinese colleagues already got the vaccinations, but of course there are always some people in society, whether in Germany, China, who don't see the need for whatever reasons. So I think that otherwise it's hard for us to answer this at the moment in another way. But yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people in Germany who feel, you know, older people even who feel, you know, they heard in the news there, you know, the AstraZeneca case, there could be other side effects. So that's in Germany, but I think even in China, I mean, some people might have reasons, other health reasons to feel not to want another injection. So, but a lot of colleagues of mine are very happy in China that they already received an vaccination. Yeah.
So it's now 4 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, I would say, yeah, I see many thanks to all panelists. See you. So and I would like to join this. See you. Thank you so much for your input, for your great contributions, and for this vibrant roundtable. Jens, would you? So let's, yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, especially thanks again to the participants.
Yes.
Thanks again to EURICS, to Sebastian Collard, to Lin Xiao, to Fabiana. It was a great time in Paris, and it's a great time. And yeah, due to the pandemic, otherwise we could have a workshop in Paris, and that would have been much better.
No, but it's also good this way. Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, and I hope we keep in contact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye. Have a nice
Bye-bye.
afternoon. Bye-bye.
Yeah.